One weekend, one island, a missing 18-year-old, and a timeline that still doesn't make sense. This was our introduction to 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells, a Northwest Mississippi Community College football player who left on the 4th of July to spend the weekend with friends on what's been called one last hurrah before the summer came to an end and they returned to school, work, football, and everyday life. But instead of those memories being ones that they looked back at and smiled, they've been replaced with the memory of Nolan disappearing on one of the most remote barrier islands along Mississippi's Gulf Coast and his body being recovered 2 days later.
Nolan Xavier Wells' body was found Monday near Horn Island, roughly 10 miles off of Mississippi's Gulf Coast.
Since the announcement of Nolan's body being found on Horn Island, the timeline can get a bit complicated depending upon who you ask. In this video, we're going to rebuild the timeline based off of information that's been given to us from news broadcasts, press conferences, interviews, and public records, and see if we could build the final hours of Nolan Wells. So we're going to roll the timeline back to the night of July 3rd, the night that his mom, Christine Wansley, reported that's the last time the family saw Nolan.
The last time we spoke and saw Nolan was July the 3rd. He cooked dinner, and after that, he was just like, "Hey, Mom, I'm about to go. I love you." Gave us a hug, kiss, and he left.
From there, Nolan left the family home to spend the night with his friend Jax. And the next morning, July 4th, Nolan and his group of friends left the mainland dock at 9:56 a.m. and arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. According to Warren Hudson, Nolan spent majority of his time on the island that day with a young woman by the name of Katie McCormack.
Katie, because she was seen with Nolan the whole day at the island.
According to the timeline, they arrived at 11:16, and according to Warren, Nolan spent all of his time with Katie. But the next movement in the timeline would come at 3 p.m. That's when Warren Hudson says that's the last time that he saw Nolan.
The last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock, and Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. That was the last time I laid eyes on him.
This is the first question about the timeline, because Warren says he saw Nolan another time shortly after saying he last saw him at 3 p.m.
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving. The boat's having issues.
Warren first said that the last time he saw Nolan, he was cuddled up with Katie at 3 p.m. But then he goes on to say that he saw Nolan in the water with Katie and that they were by the boat and the friends were calling for him to get on because they were having issues. But that would place Nolan by the boat either around the time that they made the CTO phone call, which according to this receipt provided by Plunder Studios, that call was placed at 3:48, or was that around the time that they last pulled off from the island, which would have been 4:31. Either way, according to Warren's own statements, that means that he would have seen Nolan later than that 3 o'clock time that he originally gave. Making this timeline question, when did Warren last see Nolan? The next part of the timeline comes from Javvon Williams, which is Nolan's best friend, according to his mom. And he told TMZ in his interview that has since been deleted, the last time that he saw Nolan was at around 4 p.m.
I seen Nolan whenever I got out there around 11 o'clock. I walked down to their boat. I had seen him, and it was like a whole bunch of people. I didn't expect it. So I seen Nolan. As soon as I seen Nolan, he's like, "Hey, bro, what you doing? Like, I love you, dog. I love you." And then we were just hanging out, chilling, just having a good time. And then so I want to say around 3:40, 4 o'clock, an altercation had happened between one of my other friends. I don't want to say his name, but he had got an altercation. So I went and checked on him for about 20 to 15 minutes. I came back. Nolan's boat and the people that he was with were gone.
According to Javvon, the last time he saw Nolan was around 3:40, 4 o'clock. And the last time he saw the boat that Nolan was on and the people he rode in with, based off of that 3:40, 4 o'clock timeline, would be about 4:20 in the afternoon. This is where another timeline question comes in, because Javvon says that the boat that Nolan rode in on was gone, but he turns around and says he doesn't know what boat Nolan actually rode in on.
The thing about the two boats that I said, there were two boats tied up. So therefore, I didn't know which boat Nolan exactly was on because they're both tied up.
There's actually two things with this story that raises an eyebrow and brings question, because Javvon claims he doesn't know what boat Nolan was on, but on the July 6th, interview with the Sun Herald, which is actually the day that Nolan's body was found ashore, both he and his grandmother, whose name is Doris Hands, did an interview with the newspaper. And in that interview, Doris said that both Javvon and Nolan left their phones on the boat that Nolan rode out on, and that Javvon retrieved his phone later while Nolan's mom had to search for his phone and retrieve it. Making the question on this statement, how did he not know which boat Nolan rode in on when he put his phone on the same exact boat and retrieved it from that boat later? It also raises a question of Javvon only acknowledging 2 boats when, according to Warren, he and Nolan and the group they rode to the island out with, they rode out on 3 separate boats.
Nolan was on Wyatt 22 Triton. On the way out, we had a Palm Beach, my buddy's tide line.
Now the question is, where was the 3rd boat? Because Javvon only talked about there being 2 boats tied up together. Did Javvon know anything about how many boats was there and how many people were all together? And when he says 2 boats were tied up, did he witness the tide line towing the Triton? Or could this be another situation like Warren, where Javvon thinks he was only gone for 15-20 minutes, but in all actuality, he was gone longer than that, and by the time he got back, all the boats had gone, meaning he missed all of the boat trouble and whatever happened to Nolan. The next piece of the timeline comes from Tristan Shepherd, who is the alleged self-proclaimed best friend of Nolan Wells, who's done several interviews. But we're going to focus on his Rolling Stones interview, where Tristan claimed that it was him that was on the viral video of the verbal altercation that took place on Horn Island on the 4th. According to Tristan, at 3:30, he met up with a large group of friends from high school, and that group included Nolan as well. But this is not a last sighting. Instead, Tristan says this is when he met up with Nolan at 3:30 in the afternoon. Which leads us to our next timeline question. When did Tristan last see Nolan? During his interview with Officer Tatum, Tristan does give an account of when he last saw Nolan on the island.
The last time I saw Nolan, Nolan was walking towards Wyatt's boat. I was walking in the opposite direction towards my boat. And I dabbed Nolan up. I made a slick comment about something. Actually about the girl that he was with. I made a slick comment to him, us joking around, and I kept going. And not even 10 minutes after that is when I got into a fight.
This aligns with what Javvon told us about last seeing Nolan around 3:40 because his friend got into a fight. So if that's the case, then was this 3:30 timeline that he gave to Rolling Stone not an actual meet, but actually more like a passing by with one another on the island? And that would mean that Tristan didn't see Nolan and meet up with him at 3:30. That would mean that that would be the last time that he saw Nolan. But the boys aren't the only one that's a part of this timeline, because according to Warren, Tristan, and yes, even Javvon, there was a female that Nolan was seen with on the island, and that girl is Katie McCormack.
They said that that he wanted to stay and hang out with this girl named Katie.
Katie hasn't done a lot of talking online, but her sister Gracie has done some speaking for her. From the moment that Katie's name was mentioned, Gracie took to social media and she said that Katie was not with Nolan, and that the last time that Katie saw him, she assumed that he was getting on the boat with his friends, and she didn't think that the friends would leave Nolan behind. That would mean that Katie last saw Nolan at about 4:30, 4:31, because according to the GPS information for the boats, that's the time that they pulled off from the island. So the next timeline question is, did Katie actually see Nolan get on the boat? And if she did she know that the boat was having problems and taking on water?
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat.
This is a question that Gracie has never addressed publicly, and we've never heard whether or not Katie actually saw him getting on the boat. But that's not the only timeline question that comes from this portion of the story. You see, Katie and the boys, they have a different story of how long Katie was with Nolan. As we know, the boys have all given accounts saying that they saw Nolan with Katie throughout different points of the trip.
Katie, because she was seen with Nolan the whole day at the island, and Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl.
Nolan was walking towards Wyatt's boat. I was walking in the opposite direction towards my boat. And I dabbed Nolan up. I made a slick comment about something, actually about the girl that he was with. I made a slick comment to him. I was joking around.
And remember, Javvon made mention of seeing Nolan with Katie as well. But Katie told Nolan's parents something completely different.
We don't know. We've never met Katie. I've never seen her in my life. She did reach out to me initially, just saying basically like it was a hey and bye type situation. And I was like, that's not what I'm getting from other people.
This conflict and story raises another timeline question. How long was Katie with Nolan out on the island? According to the GPS for the Triton, the boys left the island at 4:31 at a slow pace. But what still remains unclear, even with the Cito phone call, is whether or not Nolan was on that boat or if he really was left behind on the island. And while we know what we may think we hear, there's still people that haven't spoken out, like Eric, who has been quiet all this time, or Wyatt, who owned 2 of the 3 boats that went out that day, or Jax, the person whose house Nolan stayed the night at before going out to Horn Island with his friends. And what no one can seem to wrap their heads around is how does an island that is so packed on a holiday, full of people, have a bunch of people who saw nothing and knows nothing?
Everyone from Horn Island, everyone at Horn Island like that live on the coast were there pretty much. Obviously it was older people. There's a lot of people there, like honestly.
As the family awaits for answers and for the district attorney's office and the grand jury to finally close out Nolan Wells' investigation and receive answers that satisfy their questions, the family and the world all want to know, who was the last person to see Nolan alive?